3n squared plus 4n minus 4 divided by 3n squared minus 11n plus 6. We need to factor that to see if we can divide anything out, if we can simplify this expression before we do the multiplying. You can multiply it first and simplify it later, but the simplifying gets a lot harder if you purposefully make it more complex by multiplying polynomials. So let's take the 3 and multiply it by negative 4, and we get negative 12. And we need factors of negative 12 that add up to positive 4. So that would be positive 6 and negative 2. So we have n plus 6 and n minus 2. But the leading coefficient isn't 1, so let's divide both of these by 3. The 6 divided by 3 is 2, so that leaves us with 6 plus 2. 2 divided by 3, we can't simplify that, so that's why when we do the bottoms up. So we bring 3n minus 2. That is divided by 3n squared minus 11n plus 6. So we're going to multiply again. Let me do this in a different color. Denominator, we'll do that one in blue. 3 times 6 is 18. Factors of 18 that add up to negative 11, which means they both need to be negative. Because a negative times a negative will get us a positive. Negative 9 times negative 2 is positive 18. But negative 9 minus 2 is negative 11. So we'll have in our denominator, I'm just going to keep going up here, n minus 2, or n minus 9, n minus 2. And both of those have to be divided by 3. Bottoms up method. That simplifies to just 3. Negative 2 over 3 doesn't simplify, so we bring the bottom of that fraction up in front of the n. And that will leave us with n minus 3 in the denominator and a 3n minus 2, which I can see right away. That's going to divide out to 1. So now let's look at what we're multiplying by. We have, I'm just going to go ahead and factor this. You could look at that and pretty immediately say that it's going to be negative 1, but let's look at it first before we do that. Okay, so we can factor a 4 out of the numerator, and that will leave us with n minus 3. Now in the denominator, we can also factor out a 4. If we do that, it will leave us with 3 minus n. So the 4's will divide out, they equal 1. We have n minus 3 over 3 minus n. These are the exact opposites. We have a positive n in the numerator and a negative n in the denominator. We have a negative 3 in the numerator and a positive 3 in the denominator. So those divide out, but they don't divide to equal 1, they equal negative 1. It's like a 7 divided by negative 7. It's going to give you negative 1. So we have we have n plus 2, numerator, times negative 1 over n minus 3 times 1. So why isn't this one negative? Because negative 1 over 1 is negative 1. If I made this one in the denominator negative also, I'd have negative 1 divided by negative 1, which is actually positive 1. So your negative 1 just stays, it just makes this whole thing negative. Maybe I should have just stuck it out here. That's what I should do. Divide something out and you get a negative 1, just stick that thing out front. Okay, so now, just rewrite our answer in the simplest way we can. Negative n plus 2 over n minus 3. If you wanted to, you could multiply that negative 1 out and you'd get negative n minus 2 over n minus 3. Either way works with me. Alright, number 18. 2. That looks pretty simple. Let's move to the denominator. What can we factor out? Greatest common factors? Well, they both are 5, so I bet we can factor that out. And they both have an x. And that will leave us with x plus 1. Okay, in the next one we have a 5 as a greatest common factor in the numerator. They're all divisible by 5. So that'll leave us with x squared minus 4x plus 3 over 10x minus 10. The greatest common factor is 10. 10 times x minus 1. Alright, I'm just going to copy this part down because I still need to factor the numerator of the second fraction. So, this one right here. Leading coefficient's 1. Factors of 3 then that add up to negative 4. That's going to be 5 times x minus 3 times x minus 1 over 10 times x minus 1. X minus 1 divided by x minus 1 is 1. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 10 divided by 5 is 2. And then I see a 2 over here, so I have 2 divided by 2. It's going to be 1. And so what I'm left with is x minus 3 over 5x times x plus 1. And that'll be your final answer on this one. So on this one, if you did 2 times 5, and we're trying to simplify that way, 2 times 5 is 10. At that point, you would probably see 10 divided by 10, that's just 1. So you can do it all at one time if you multiply across, and then realize as long as it gets simplified in the end. Do number 19. See if we can squeeze at least 19 here, if not 20. Okay, factoring the first one here. Any greatest common factors in the numerator? Well, this one will divide by 5, and 15 will divide by 5, but 28 won't. So I'm just going to cut my losses, and I'm going to look for factors of 75 that add up to negative 28. So I'm going to have two negative factors. Because negative times a negative is a positive, but negative 25 plus negative 3 is negative 28. So there's my two factors. So I've got r minus 25 times r minus 3. Leading coefficient, though, it's 5. So I divide this by 5, and I divide this by 5. Well, the first term, 25 divided by 5 is 5. But the next one, 3 divided by 5, that doesn't divide evenly, so I bring the bottom up in front of my variable, 5r minus 3. That will be divided by the denominator. What can I factor out of there? 12 and 4, they both have a common factor of 4. And then r cubed and r squared. The smaller of the two would be r squared. So I can factor out an r squared. See? I'm left with 3r plus 1 in the parentheses here. It's 4r squared times 3r gets me 12r cubed, and 4r squared times 1 gets me 4r squared. Alright, now, I'm dividing, which means I gotta flip the second fraction so that I can multiply straight across the top. So we're looking at 9r plus 3, because that's going to go in the numerator, actually. The greatest common factor there is a 3. I'm left with 3r plus 1. Divided by 9 minus 15r. Well, they have that has a common factor also of 3. So 3 times 3 is 9, and 3 times negative 5r is negative 15r. So now let's look for things to divide out. 3 divided by 3, that's 1. 3r plus 1, 3r plus 1. Now again we have this situation. We have a positive 5r in the numerator, negative 5r right here. We have a negative 3 in the numerator and a positive 3 down here. So those will divide out, but we have to stick a negative sign out front because they divide to equal negative 1, not positive 1. So what are we left with? A negative r minus 5 over 4r squared. You can leave it like that. We can distribute that negative sign. Negative r plus 5 over 4r squared. One of those. We'll go ahead and stop it there and make the last number 28's own video.